Well, welcome to another exciting episode of Light Vision Art Q&A. Of course, I am the host of the show, Alfonso Ashworth, and we have an exciting show for you today. Of course, we got some things that we're going to do before we bring on our guest for the day, but I am very excited to have this person on the show. And of course, technology is great when it works. Now, we're expecting several to come into the classroom today. Of course, we'll have people asking questions, making comments, and of course, the guest today, Christian Sperka, is going to be coming from South Africa. He works with the Thanda Private Game Reserve there. He's got a rich history in photography. He's an excellent humanitarian. He does a lot of work with the animals there. And I got to know Christian a while back. I think it was 2011 when I met Christian through my group called the Wilson County Photography Guild. And he was our very first speaker, and we were honored to have him. And of course, he came back again before he left our area and moved to South Africa. And I'm very appreciative that he would take his time to come on the show today to discuss what he does, how he does it, and he's going to be willing to open himself up to your questions. What we're going to do is first, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I want to honor some people today that are very close to my heart. And of course, if you normally see my show, you normally see this image here, the dark room. So Christian is not in my dark room today. So the dark room is not in use today. But we like to put this up to remind people that we are a photo finisher. And we go way back. We have a rich history in the photo finishing industry, and we're very honored to be a part of that community. But I want to give honors today to a group of individuals that I have become very close to. And this motley crew is part of our photography guild, which has grown tremendously over the years. And the group that you see here, the reason I want to bring attention to what they're doing, we raised over $5,500 about 3 years ago to help the Tennessee School of the Blind raise money to build them a radio station at the school. And this is part of the ongoing help that we provide. This year, we were able to give them $500 that was raised by our group by us helping the Wilson Bank and Trust Oktoberfest photography event. And so I'm proud to be a part of this group, and I want to give them honors for what they did. And some of them actually come on the show from time to time. And we are very honored to have them as part of our organization. Thank you, guys. And as I said earlier, I am Alfonso Ashworth with Light Vision Art Q&A, which is part of my class that I teach. I teach photography. We do a class that helps, of course, help others learn the art that we love so dearly. But we are going to get started, and as soon as I see a few more people get in this classroom, because I don't want you to miss this show, and I don't want you to miss the opportunity to ask Christian questions, to ask him, give him your thoughts on what it is that he does. But before we do that, of course, I always do a little something called ringing the school bell. And here we go. So we've rung the school bell. I want you guys to get ready for your questions. You can post your questions and comments in the timeline. If you want me to post those as a comment or a question, I will put them on the topic screen and we will go from there. But at the moment, we're going to bring Christian on. I think he's ready to come on. And
Hello.
hello, Christian Sperka. How you doing today?
Very good, thank you. How are you? Can you hear me all right? It's a long way talking all the way from Africa.
It is a very long way, and of course, yes, I hear you fine. I hear you well, and we're looking forward to having a great show today. And I want to thank you once again for taking your time. Tell the audience what time is it in South Africa at this moment?
It's about 6 o'clock in the evening. It's getting dark now.
And we're just now
We're eight
getting our
hours
day
ahead.
started here in Tennessee. Yes. So it's a little after 10 here, of course. And people have a tendency to get started slow in Tennessee. Of course, you're familiar with this area because you lived here for some time. Or would you like to tell us when was that? When did you live in this area?
Actually, I left in 2012 and I lived there for 5 years before that. So I arrived around the end of 2007.
Yes. And of course, we became associated in about 2011. And Bobby Todd, our president of the guild, asked you to come and speak to our group. And you did a slide presentation, and it was very fascinating. And we're going to do a little bit of that today where we allow you to talk about what you do. And if you'd like to get started, we'll start in on letting you tell the viewers what it is that you do there in Thanda at the private game reserve.
Thanks, I will do that. If you bring up the first slide, um, it's funny to look at elephant bums first. The reason why I bring them up is because when I lived in Nashville, I was quite often in traffic jams, and usually it was cars. When I have a traffic jam here on Thanda, it's actually looks like this. There is only a few cars on the reserve, but there is lots of these. So but before I go on, can you get me the next slide, please? Just explain a little bit where exactly I am. Um, Many of you, or some of you, will know that I lived in Nashville and I was actually working as a zoo photographer for 2 years before I left for Africa. And I now live in South Africa, which you see on that map. If you look on the globe on the left bottom side there, it's the southern tip of Africa where the country of South Africa is located. And within that, on the very eastern coast, it's on the Indian Ocean, is a state called KwaZulu-Natal. And the part of that is Zululand, which is still a kingdom. And I live actually very close to the coast. It's about 40 miles to the coast from here. And that is the place where I'm right now. Can you give me the next slide, please? And if you go on to the reserve where I live, can you get me the next? Thank you. I live actually in a farmhouse on the northern part of the reserve. Sorry, my phone's going. On the northern part of the reserve, and that's the one. And where that arrow points, I'm sitting right now in that corner of that farmhouse, and I'm talking to you over an internet link that goes. We are obviously wireless somewhere in that area because we don't have any landlines in the bush here. Okay, so let's start off with what I'm doing. Next slide, please. My main job in Africa nowadays is actually I'm a guide and field guide and ranger, which means that I take guests out on game drives, looking at animals. On the farm where I live is about 55,000 acres. We have all the big five, and my main job next to the guiding is actually teaching photography. And for the last 3 years since I'm here, it's about 3.5 years now, I taught about 650 people photography. Very simple, similar method what I taught in Nashville, what I developed there at the zoo. But my main job is to teach guests how to take mainly motion photography picture. Get me the next slide, please. Looking at photography, there's really three types of photography. The first type of photography is still photography, where you take pictures of landscapes and buildings. The second type is photography where you take people. And the third one is called motion photography, which is like things that move. Can be sports, animals, anything that moves. Now, I deal mostly with the third group, obviously, because with wildlife, quite unpredictable, and you deal with that. Now, I talked a little bit about that at various occasions in the US. I talked to, I think, in total 10 different photography clubs about this. When you do motion photography and you do it by my method, it basically means that you simplify what you do, but you have to be ready. The main thing, the main difference between photography on any still thing like a landscape or a building or a person towards the motion photography is that you have no time to really fiddle with your equipment and go around and get little setups done when you're facing a situation. You have to be ready. So that's part of that. The second is keep it simple, means that you only alter very, very few things while you're going about. Thirdly, get on eye level with whatever you shoot if you can. That sometimes gets tricky, as you can imagine. If you do that at the wrong time, it can get you a bit into trouble. Have patience. It's quite important, and keep shooting. In modern times, we can nowadays with digital photography shoot a lot. And what I usually teach people very much here is a photographer gets never judged by what he shoots. He gets judged by what he shows people. So it's really your selection what at the end makes the day, not what you actually have shot. So keep going to the next one. Next slide. So on Thanda, as I said, I'm teacher. I'm a guide. I also do all the social networking. So if you ever deal with Thanda in terms of internet, Facebook, Twitter, Google Plus, any of that, then it's usually me behind that. And I also do obviously all the photography for the reserve. Somebody asked me the other day how it is for me to live on Thanda or on a game reserve in Africa. And I said, it's probably similar to having a kid living permanently in Disneyland, because you basically get to do what you like to do. And next to the beautiful images that you get to do, just go to the next one, that's fine. You get to shoot a lot of animal pictures, but we're getting a bit far there. Can you go back to number 80? I think something's mixed up. Not a big issue. Oh, there we go. Yeah, this was just some zebras. But what I wanted to say here is it's not only animals. If you look at the next slide, one slide from here, you can do a lot of landscape stuff as well. And you get a lot of opportunities when you live in the bush. The biggest difference to when I lived in the States and in Europe and all over the world before I came here, that I only spent here about 2 to 3 weeks every year as a photographer visiting. Nowadays, I do it basically for a living every day. That gives much more opportunities. Beside that, next slide, I also enjoy taking pictures of people. And I'm living in between the Zulus, which is the local peoples here that lived here for a long time. And they're very nice, very proud people, but they also love cameras. So it's actually great to work with them. The one on the left that you see here in that picture is a married lady in her traditional garb, and on the right side is an elderly gentleman. And you can get a lot of character pictures. I also get invited, next slide please, to some local events, for example, a wedding. This is a picture of a traditional Zulu wedding, and that gets quite interesting, next to the wildlife, shooting people's events. And by the way, weddings in Zululand, there's very little staged photography given there. When you go to traditional weddings, you have to be ready like you do in any other motion photography setting. Yeah, so that's, keep going, one more. Sometimes very traditional photography, which is used for the reserve, it's used for advertisement, because a lot of our guests not only like to see the animals, but they also like to interact with the local culture. And you have to make a living. When I'm here, I also work for reserves to do some other photography style, and that is, for example, lodges, which is the, oops, sorry, I have to get you back here on my screen. There you go. The lodges, next picture, please. I do pictures of the lodge interior, exterior, which is very much still photography, totally different skill set required. That's not my main job. And I started doing something that is quite important for down here. It actually sounds funny. It's the next slide, is actually food photography. A lot of the lodges are 5-star lodges, and they want to advertise the 5-star cuisine that they offer, and I started getting into that as well. In my free time, on the next slide, please. In my free time, I also started horse riding and doing that in a horse riding reserve where you can actually do safaris on horseback. Doing photography of that is a totally different issue, but also quite interesting. When Al invited me, he actually started talking about what kind of my movies, my videos that are online he could show. And if you just go to the next slide, we will, after I'm finished, he will show you a quick video, I think, of something that I also learned to do. People always ask me, you know, when you're in Africa, what's very special? And one of the things that I do on Thanda is I'm a snake handler. I actually take care of most of our snake issues that we have on the reserve. If snakes are in the wrong place, especially venomous snakes, and relocate them. I don't like to kill them. We'll get them to other places so they can live on without interacting with the humans. And the next picture, this is actually, by the way, 2 black mambas, which is one of the most venomous snakes in the world, fighting. And the next picture is actually me taking one of those snakes out of a tree. And as I said, that's something I learned, and I didn't learn it because I was in love with snakes. I learned it because I said, as a guide in Africa, dealing with people, dealing with guests, you want to make sure that you actually are able to deal with a problem. You know, if a guest comes to you in the morning and says, you're the guide, and said, oh, I have a snake in my room, can you help me? And you say, no, I don't really know what I'm doing either. That would not be good. So I learned that as well. And it came up with giving me great opportunities for photography as well, which is something I wouldn't get if I would do that sort of job. Also, if you go to the next slide, what's quite interesting, I get often involved in wildlife activities with the wildlife team in conservation efforts. That can have to do mainly with rhinos nowadays. Some of you may know rhinos are under huge threat internationally because of their horns and because of the poaching. Last year in South Africa, over 1,200 rhinos were killed for their horns. And we as a reserve have to protect them. And we have to also deal with conservation efforts on other animals like cheetah, lions. So I get involved in a lot of these operations, and I'm the one that takes all the photography for them. And then I learned something. When I lived in Nashville, I dealt with the zoo mostly, and I was very much involved in the mammal side of the things. And I got now interested in another type of photography, which some of you may be interested in if you just go one further on. And that is actually bird photography. Quite an interesting subject, and also a lot of opportunities when you're around here for bird photography. I love to spend my time in hides and in places in game reserves around us where bird photography is really great to do. You can go to the next slide. Beside being on a game reserve like I'm now, which is a private game reserve, it's rather costly to stay here. It's mostly international, mostly foreign people that stay here. Locals can hardly afford it. But also in KwaZulu-Natal, in the state where I live, there's a lot of national parks around us that I can spend time on any time I like when I'm off. And also to know them is quite good because each one of them has a speciality. We got about 6 different beautiful national parks just around us in a radius of about 2.5–3 hours to car drive. But coming back to the beginning here and to what I'm doing mostly, if you give me the next slide, I deal with motion photography, and that's really my passion to get good images of things that move, of things that have actions in them. And that's what I usually teach when guests either come for just the regular lessons that I give, or when they spend with me quite a few days on safari, trying to learn how to capture wildlife best. And the last image in the series, before I open this up for questions or anything you might like to know what I'm doing, this is actually my way to work. Now yours may look a little different. This was in the morning when I went to work along the fence. I drive along the fence to the main camp, and these 2 cheetah boys in this picture, they're quite often in my way. So that's another little traffic jam that I get from time to time. The next slide shows all my contacts and stuff, but I'll give it over to Al to maybe talk about any questions that you might have.
Well, I really want to appreciate that. I appreciate that presentation, Christian. It was very thorough, and it let the listeners and viewers know that course, what you do is not just something that you started out overnight, but your website and all the information that you can share with the viewers, and I'll post it on the screen there. I'm going to leave it up for a few seconds, but I do want to show that video that you mentioned concerning snake handling. I think people find that very fascinating, and it's somewhat dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. That's for sure. But we're going to try to show
Yes,
this video for a second.
Yeah, sure. Yes. Right now I can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
Okay, I forgot to turn my sound back on, Christian.
No
As
problem.
I said, with my mic off, if you have not been experienced at this, do not try this at home. Tell the viewers, what type of snake was that, Christian?
Yeah, well, what you saw was actually a release of a snake that I have captured previously. It was a Mozambican spitting cobra, and with that snake, the speciality is it actually will, to defend itself, it will spit up to about 6 feet, and it's very directional, straight in your face. So you must wear some protective gear when you handle those snakes. But they don't spray quite as often as one would think. But in this particular case, she actually thought that the lens of the little GoPro camera was an eye, so she gave it a full spraying right there when I released her, and that happens from time to time. It's just part of the game. But this was a very small one. This was a little one, so it's quite easy to handle. We have some much larger specimens. But, seeing snakes, people always ask me, when you come to Thanda, do you see snakes all the time as a guest? It's actually a very rare occurrence. It's mainly in the staff quarters, in the living quarters that we have, where we see them in the lodges. It's very, very rare. I usually have to start looking for them if somebody wants to see one.
We have a question, and I'm going to put it on the topic on the screen. It says somebody had wanted to know, they wanted to send you some regrets that they couldn't be here. And another question that I didn't get on is, how do you get started in this helping the reserve? What does a person have to do to get started with this?
Well, the one thing was, some you may know, or some people know that knew me before, that I was actually an IT executive until about 2009. So in 2009, I made a decision that I didn't really want to work in that field anymore, and I was a photographer and wildlife photographer since about 2001, but it was more like a serious hobby. So I made a decision in 2009 to turn this into a profession. But that you don't do overnight. So I first started working for the National Zoo, started developing some photography method there, which was a great opportunity, and I'm grateful for the zoo to give me these opportunities that I had. I worked there as a volunteer, but also as the photographer. And from there, I made a decision that this has to be Africa. Ultimately, I knew that since a long time from my retirement. I just didn't think that I would do it as a job much earlier. So I did the appropriate education. Now, one of the things that's very important is only to be a photographer would not get you into any game reserve. You have to be actually a fully blown guide, and I'm a fully qualified guide. So I actually did all the qualifications that are needed to do guiding, to understand animals, to work with them. And that I started very, very early on, many, many years ago, but the qualifications themselves I did in 2010. And I went to Africa to do that. And once I had those, I actually then sent resumes with my idea of having a resident wildlife photographer, which is really my job description here at Thanda. And I did that, and I sent that to a couple different reserves, and Thanda actually accepted it. And then after about 9 months trying to get a visa for South Africa, I was able to come here in June 2012. So I started the process in about end of 2010, and it finished in mid of 2012. So you have to be a bit patient. And one of the things that, like always in life, if you want to do something, then go after it. And ultimately, if you work hard enough on it, you're usually going to get it.
We have another question that I want to put up on the screen. It says, I'm sure you have some close calls with the animals. Tell us some of them, please.
Yes, it's the most asked question, funny wise. And it was actually funny that because Al had a thing that he asked me, please talk about your near-death experiences. And I said, well, usually I have very few near-death experiences. But, like with anything else in life, what happens is when you do something wrong, that's when you get yourself into trouble. For example, if you cross a road and you do it at the wrong time, at the wrong place, you get run over by a bus and you get into trouble, right? Well, and it's not always fatal. The grass may streak and you may jump away, but you may have had a near-death experience right there. So you can do that in a city. You don't need to come to the bush for that. But now coming back to what kind of experiences I had, obviously with the reptiles, it gets quite funny. I just recently had a very large spitting cobra. The one that you just saw, it was a small one. This one was about almost about 6 feet long, and she was quite big, and we knew she was around the house where I live for a while. And I had finally some ladies saw her. They kept an eye on her so I could start catching her, and she actually gave a really good fight. Normally it takes me about 10 to 20 seconds between the time I start catching the snake with the snake sticks before I have her in the barrel. She fought for 2 minutes. So that was kind of hard work, and you start sweating under your mask there. I can tell you that part. Also, sometimes what happens is I had some run-ins on foot when I go to do walking, and you get some situations where, especially with rhinos and buffalo, where you have to make sure the next trees are in sight, and that you make sure you can climb something up if you need to. Otherwise, it's not really that I constantly get myself into situations where I think, this is not what I can deal with. Often the guests on the car think, oh, this is a hairy thing, where no, it isn't, because you can read the animal's behavior. And funny, asking about that question brings me to a topic that is also quite important for a wildlife photographer. One of the most important things to learn after you know all the techniques is actually to learn about behavior of animals. And this is more than just doing a little study for a couple months. This is something that develops over a long time. And nowadays, I know exactly how to interpret an elephant's piece of mind, female or male. I know how to identify what a lion's going to do. I know if the rhino is upset or not. I know if the herd of buffalo is going to what it's going to do next. And these sort of things help you. That interpretation helps you in getting really good images coming to that.
We have another question from Bruce Harrison, and he says, do you plan your photo shoots in detail, or are your images captured just by being there at the right moment?
99% it's the second part of his statement. It's at the right moment. When you, let me explain this with a football game. If you're at a football game, you're at the game, but you're not planning a particular picture. You can't, because you don't know what's going to happen. So you're going to shoot whatever you're going to have. You shoot a lot, and then you pick the best pictures. It's the same here. I go on a game drive, and I start looking. Let's say I start looking for lions. Yes, I'll go looking for lions. And then once I'm with the lions, I'm trying to bring the vehicle in the best position. Once I have the vehicle in the best position, then I start shooting things, and I try to get things going. But it's not planned in terms of saying, I can plan today to take a picture of two elephants mating. Oh, I don't know. They might be mating, they may not be mating. There's no such thing as a plan for that. So what it really is, you take all the opportunities you can get, and you're ready for it. There is occasions when you can plan, but there's very few of them. They're usually associated with either people, lodges, food, or anything like that I photograph. That is purely planned photo shoots. But when you deal with animal in motion, then that does not work as a planned issue.
You know, that brings up another thought in my mind when you said lion chaser, when you chase lions. I do a radio show called Lion Chasers, and you chase lions in a sense that I think many people would only imagine you would see in a movie. So what is it particularly that fascinates you about the lion?
Well, I love cats. So my favorite one is leopards. I worked actually, before I came to Africa permanently, I worked as a photographer with a leopard conservation project for a long time. There's an organization which is actually has its headquarters in New York called Panthera, and Panthera is the world's organization for the protection of wild cats. I'm one of their photographers, still am, and I contribute to their work all the time. And I love cats, so doing lion photography is a very interesting subject to me. Doing cheetah, lions, leopards, all the cats. Now, when I say I track them, and that's maybe also interested for whoever listens in here, I don't go out by myself, with a camera walking around in the bush. Usually it's on a vehicle. It's actually on a game viewing vehicle, which is like an open Land Rover. And there is a guy sitting up front on a little seat on the bonnet. And his name is Begi Ngubane. He's actually a local Zulu. He works with me since 3 years now. And he's a tracker. He actually looks for the signs of the animals, and he finds them for me. It's not me just knowing exactly where the lions are. These lions don't come for interviews or meetings. You actually have to track them down day by day. And you do that by reading the signs of the bush. And it's not only lions. You look for anything that you can find fresh signs. It can be rhinos, it can be elephants, it can be sometimes giraffes or zebras or whatever you're going to do.
We have one more question from someone in the room, from Terry Swain. Says, "Hi, Christian. Good to see you. What type of lenses do you typically use? I am assuming you're a fair distance away from the animals."
Yine. That happens. That can be very, very different. Sometimes the elephants are so close that the bull might want to touch my car in the front. That's when the guests get really excited. Most of the time animals are in a reasonable distance, but sometimes they get close. It's actually a funny thing. If you're stationary, if you're standing, and the animals make the decision to come close to you, it's usually not an issue. Okay, you may have to deal with it in some degree, but sometimes I have lions walking by in about 3 feet distance to the car. If you have these animals often interacting with one another, then you can't get close, because otherwise you're disturbing that interaction. So you actually stay far away and you use long lenses. To answer the question about the equipment, I'm using Canon to say, doesn't really matter Canon or Nikon, but I'm a Canon person, started with that. So I use Canon cameras. I use 3 bodies. I use 3 1D Mark IVs, exactly identical bodies. By the way, that's very important for a motion photographer. Anybody that deals with speed, you always want, if you have multiple bodies, make sure they're all the same. Make sure you don't have different bodies, because every body is operating different and it makes you slower. You want to really know those bodies, and you can only do that if they're all the same. So I shoot 3 bodies the same, and each body has different lenses on it. If I go out with guests, I usually only have space on the car for 1 body, and that has a 28 to 300 millimeter lens. So it's a lens with quite a wide range. It goes from 28 millimeter to 300, sort of an all-around lens you can do everything with. If I go out by myself, which happens quite often, for pure photography purposes, then I take all 3 cameras, and I usually have about 8 lenses with me. The longest one, 500 millimeter 4.0, a nice long apparatus. Very, very good for bird photography. A 300 2.8, excellent for mammal photography. And I also use a 70 to 200 and a 24 to 70 2.8 for more work that's in the evenings and around close-up things. I also have a wide-angle lens, 17 to 44 for more scenery shots. Having said all that, the 2 lenses that make probably 90% of all my pictures is the 28 to 300 and the 500 millimeter. That's the 2 most used lenses.
And there's no doubt that you've invested quite a bit in your gear. And I think some people have trouble with understanding how important the lenses are. But of course, you also mentioned the box with a hole in it as well. But what about the cost in terms of your investment?
Yeah, look, I collected equipment since 2001, and I used to have a job that paid quite good money, so I was able to buy all this equipment. Lenses have the advantage that they don't age very much. The bodies you need to change every 3-4 years, maybe 5 years, but the lenses actually will last you a long time if you get a good lens. People always ask me for advice and stuff, and I always say, it depends on. There's 3 things you need to answer yourself before you buy any equipment. The first question is always the magic one: what's your budget? Okay, how much money do you have available? Second question: how much am I willing to carry? What's the weight that I'm willing to carry? And the third question: what am I going to use for? Once you know those 3 questions, what you're going to be using it for, how much money you have, and how much weight you're willing to carry, then you can define what kind of equipment you need. Obviously, I'm well equipped with that stuff. Today, I would say people always used to say in the old days that photography really happens in the lenses, and it wasn't that important what kind of body you use. And that was the case, but it's not the case anymore. Today, it's equally important because so much happens in the camera, especially when it comes to light sensitivity. And light sensitivity is very, very important for motion photography because it allows you to use fast shutter speeds, even with lower lights, with very good results. And that's what you need, because most animals' actions are either in the morning or in the evening during what you call the crepuscular hour, where it gets light and dark. So equipment is very important, and obviously the more you can afford it, the better you can afford, the better it is. You don't need as much as I have, but it obviously helps if you have a lot of different options to do things.
We had one more lion question that I'm going to post. It says, what was the closest were you to a lion? What was the closest you've been able to get to a lion?
Let me explain one thing first. You get very close to animals in the open game viewing vehicle, in an open vehicle. These vehicles look like a car that you have sawn off the whole top, and then you put some seats on top. So you sit quite in the open, no roof, nothing, you just sit in the open. Animals ignore you when you're in that vehicle. So you can actually get very, very close. On foot, it's a totally different business, because on foot, all animals are afraid of you. They all have their fear of humans, and they will run away as soon as they have an opportunity. Only if you get too close by accident, then they will, or they feel cornered, then they will attack you. But it is very, very rarely that you see actually big animals in the bush if you don't sort of sneak up on them. Coming back to the question, how close to lions? Well, I often have lions so close that if I would stick my hand out of the car, I can actually crawl their backsides. Not that I do, but I could just pet them. But you obviously don't want to do that, because they don't think cars have arms. Okay, so but you can get pictures very, very close. To be clear, with a wide angle lens, I can easily get the lion and the mirror of the back mirror of my car into the same picture.
We have one more question that I want to post, and it's one that I'm interested in as well, Christian. They're asking here, are you shooting in RAW or JPEG?
Yes, well, that's easy to answer. About 95% JPEG and maybe about 5% RAW. The reason why I shoot JPEG has really 3 reasons for it. Number one is I need the speed a lot of times that my cameras provide in JPEG, which is much better than what you get out of RAW, especially when it comes to burst rates. You know, if you shoot fast and you want a lot of pictures taken. Second, post-processing time is cut down a lot, and I will easily take in one morning between 600 and 800 images sometimes. So processing them is a very tedious business, but I need to be fast with that. And third is, with today's very good JPEGs that come out of my cameras and the tools that I use to manipulate them, I'm a very strange person. I use AC/DC Pro and PaintShop Pro to actually manipulate my images. I don't use any Adobe products, not because of any religious reasons. It's basically just because that I'm so used to them and I don't see a need to spend all that money. But when do I use RAW? When I see that it could be light critical. Very often when I deal with humans, when I deal with photography in lodges or with food, when I deal with still photography, then I often deal with RAW. You know, when I have a lot of time, when I do not as many shots, but normally I shoot JPEG, and the difference is negligible in a lot of the results. You know, sometimes you may get a bit more out of RAW. I'm aware of that, but I'll trade that anytime against the other reasons that I just mentioned.
Well, that leads to the next question that someone had asked earlier. The question is, after discarding pics, how many images would you guesstimate is in your archives?
Let me first explain quickly my method of working. If I come back, let's say, from a game drive with 600 images, then I copy them onto the system in a specific folder. I go through them twice. The first time I go through, I take the very top images that I can see right now. Okay, they are stunners. I put them in a folder. That's usually 2 or 3. Okay, that's not more than that. Then I go through the same series again, and I look for every scene that I did, for every scenario, for maybe 1, 2, or 3 good images that should make it into my library. I copy them into the same folder. Once I have those images together in the folder, those are the ones that will go into my library. And that is very rarely more than, let's say, 2 to 5% of what I originally shot. Maybe a little more, depending, you know, what kind of sighting it was. And again, we're talking here about the motion photography part, the wildlife stuff. It's very, very different when you shoot lodges or food or anything like that. Even landscapes is different because you're not shooting as much. But like for sunsets, the one you're showing right now, you know, I take a lot of different shots. I try out a lot of different things, and then I will maybe keep maximum of 5% into my library. And what goes in my library is also, there's 2 different ways that I deal with things. I put all my pictures that are now put in that selection into my library filed, but only about half, not even half of them, about 25%, I will actually finally edit and then make them available on my online galleries, or offer them to anybody, or put them in books or anything like that. The rest stay in the unedited format until I need them. And I will always keep the original format of a file next to the edited version. I'm also, by the way, I'm also a cropper. I crop things very unorthodoxly. I'm not into 4:3s and 1:1s all the time, or whatever it is. I crop whatever I want, but I always keep the original so I can go back to it.
Someone just asked, they said or posted that they loved the zebra shot that we just showed. They said it was phenomenal. And of course, we also have another person and Bruce wants to ask another question. He asked, are you using handheld or tripod mostly, I guess?
Okay, yes. The answer is very easy. I never ever use a tripod for motion photography. When sorry, I shouldn't have said that. It's not never. It's actually with the exception when I sit at bird heights. But normally off the vehicle, I use actually called bean bags. It's bags full with beans. By the way, bean bags are not bean bags anymore. What you actually do is every photographer should always travel with 2 to 3 rolls of duct tape. And what you do is when you get to a country where you do wildlife photography, you buy 5 10-pound sacks, 3 5 10-pound sacks of rice, and then you put duct tape around them, and you got these 3 packs now with you that you can build all kinds of camera stands that work very, very quickly. Tripods are too limiting for that work. I use tripods with food photography, with lodge photography, with landscape, but for the wildlife photography, everything's handheld, even my 500. When I do bird photography of a height, then I will use a tripod with a gimbal. But otherwise, I'm not using that because it's too limiting in what I need to do. For example, when you just had that zebra shot with the lion jumping on the back, it's a part of a series of about 17 or 18 shots, and they were all shot out of the hand. Yeah, that one. That one, by the way, the good news is the zebra survived because it kicked the lion in the stomach and got away.
Well, you can't win them all, Christian. You win a few and you
yeah. Just one more comment on the handheld and tripod. Some people love to use monopods, especially if you don't have a very steady hand. I have a very steady hand, and I taught myself how to hold the camera properly. But if you have a problem with stability or maybe shakes, then a monopod sometimes can help, especially off the vehicle, because you can sort of set it on the ground and then just use it. But again, even a monopod limits you in what you can do. So I rather use nothing or the beanbags.
I'm sure that your guests bring all sorts of gadgets when they come to the reserve. Can you remember maybe some that come to mind that you sort of wondered why they brought the items to photograph, used for photography?
Yeah, look, it's actually funny. Most guests, because they travel from internationally, they have weight restrictions on their flights, so they can't bring actually too much stuff. But often people bring heavy tripods or monopods, and then they get a bit disappointed after I taught them what to do that they actually don't need that thing. People often also bring the wrong lenses because they haven't informed themselves before what to do. Sometimes I have very serious amateur photographers or even professionals, and they come with very sophisticated equipment that we install on the car. It can be anything from gimbals with special holders to special beanbag setups with the little platforms on the back of the car. There's all kinds of stuff. But it's rather rare. Most of the people come just with the cameras and the lenses.
Yeah. One more question in the topic is autofocus or manual?
Okay. Yes, good question. In 90% of the time, it's autofocus. But what is very important, I'm switching off all the focal points in the camera except the center focal point. I will never ever use any of. I mean, if Canon would make a modern camera and take out all these autofocus modes and reduce it by $1,000 in price, I would buy that model. Because all these autofocus things to me don't really work for what I'm doing. So I use center point focus only. I do a lot of cropping, okay? And I use continuous focus virtually all the time. You cannot afford to do one shot or AFS, as you call it in Nikon words, with wildlife, because wildlife moves. It moves towards you, away from you. By the time you press that button all the way through, your animal is already out of focus if you use not continuous focus. So it's autofocus, single point focus, combined with continuous focus. And that's also true for sports. That's what you want to use. That's how you're going to get the shots. At least in my opinion.
Well, before we wind up the show, yeah, and I agree with that as well. I use center point focus myself. I normally will focus. I like to focus on a point. And that's one of the techniques I use in my class as well, Christian. Before we wrap up and get ready to end the show, I want you to give the Reserve a plug. Tell people how they can, help the reserve or be a part of what you do.
Yeah, well, as I said, the best way of helping a private game reserve is by staying there. So if you're a guest, that's how you support us, is actually by staying on a place like Thanda, which is very nice. We have actually, if you look at it up online, it's www.thanda, which is THANDA.com. And Thanda is a game reserve in the 5-star area, so it's quite costly. But it has 3 different properties. It has a tented camp, luxury tented camp, which it's not little A-frames. It's actually beautiful big tents with even bathrooms in it. It has a luxury lodge, and it has a private villa. So this is where our guests stay. If you want to become involved in conservation, then contact me anytime, especially in rescuing rhinos. It needs a lot of funds, and if you're willing to help on any of these fronts, we're very, very grateful. Just send me an email at christian@sperka.com, or just go on my website and go take the contact form. Sperka, my last name. If you Google it, you will get to me. Don't worry. And on this picture now is actually all the information that's required. Any game reserve in Africa is always struggling for the funds to need to support everything that you do with the animals, and to support them. Because nowadays poaching, especially rhinos, is our biggest issue, and to protect them requires a lot of efforts. So if you want to help anything along that field, fine, that's great, let me know. And if you like to learn more about photography here, well, then the best thing is come here and stay, and I'm sure I'll teach you.
Well, someone wanted to make the comment, not only Tarpley wanted to say, we truly enjoy your company and your presentation, and we do hope to see you here again. So the next time you visit the States or visit Tennessee, we want to make sure that we see you once again, Christian.
Yeah, my plan is to be possibly in the US if I get some connections to some of the photography clubs. I work with quite a few of them. For some talks. I might be back next year in about May or June. At least that's my current plan. So, but I will let, if you follow, I would recommend anybody that's interested in what I do to follow my blog. That's the main thing. Go on my website and follow the blog. And if you do, then you will know if something like that happens. The blog is actually the top one, sperka.com. Just sign up with it with your email address, and you get regular information. It's better than following any of the others. The information's there as well, but it's always flying by, and you never know if you're going to see it. It would be nice to see some of you again in Nashville in due course.
Well, you know what? I want to thank you for taking the time, the hour out of your day, and of course the prep work that was involved in putting this show together. Many people don't know what you have to do to get the material together and those sort of things. And we're talking to Christian Sperka from South Africa at the Thanda Private Game Reserve. And he has been my guest on Light Vision Art Q&A today. And we've had a lively group in the class. We will be posting this video for review or replay. And I will be letting others know about what you do, Christian. So I want to thank you for being on today. And looking forward to seeing you in person again.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for joining in.
Of course, that was Christian Sperka. Met him in 2011. Been looking forward to talking with him, and was able to get him on the show today. And of course, I want to thank all the ones who asked the questions and took part in this show. If you would like to be a part of what we do here, you can, of course, be a part of Light Vision Art Q&A. And also, if you are someone that's interested in what I do on the radio, I do a radio guest host for a show called Lion Chasers with Lonnie Poindexter that is broadcast out of our nation's capital. And you can also find me there. And we do a class, we do private and group classes for Light Vision Art, and it's the Educated Eye, and we've been teaching that class for nearly 30 years. And the Christian covered a lot of territory today in the photography world, of course, in his world, and many people are not equipped. Whether you have the camera or the box with the hole in it does not mean that you're equipped to be a game reserve guide or do what Christian does, because it takes a lot of dedication, a lot of personal time, and it also takes a lot of investment in your equipment. And I encourage you to learn it the right way. If you're interested in doing that, make sure that you go to these websites that I'm posting here at Sperka.com, his blog. You can also find his gallery. Christian is easy to find. I mean, you just type in Sperka or type in Christian Sperka, and you'll find him all over Google. And of course, he has a Facebook page. He's on Google, Twitter, and Instagram. So he will be easy for you to locate and find, and he would be glad to help you. That's the one thing I found out about Christian when I first met him, is that he was very cordial, very willing to help others, and to also share with others some of the things that he's been able to accomplish with his photography. You know, every week we do a show, Light Vision Art Q&A, and we try to add on to our information every week. And we've had people that are storm chasers, equipment rental people, and this is going to be one of the most fascinating uh, topics that we've had on the show. I encourage you to share this information on your Facebook page, on your social media sites, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you can get this information out there so that others can come and enjoy this show. And if you would love to, make a donation to the show. At the top, you see a donation button. You know, whatever your heart desires. It helps me help others. We do this on our own, and we do this with the mindset that we want to help others. But we're getting ready to, of course, wind up the show. And we want to thank you for being on. And as usual, technology has a way of interfering with just about whatever we try to do in this time. But we want to go out with just a little music. And we want to thank you for being a part of Light Vision Art Q&A. And next week, we're going to be back on again. And we thank you very much. And have a nice weekend.